The third challenge that we want to talk about this morning is his cabinet. The cabinet should have been a body that would have supported and sustained Abraham Lincoln, but it never did. It was basically a tempest. It was a source of continuing aggravation for the President of the United States. Think about all of us in our work, and if you've ever been in an administrative position or ever been a part of a senior management team, there are characteristics of a good senior management team, and that is there is a relationship of mutual respect and trust. That was absolutely missing from Lincoln's cabinet. It was a collection of people who were jealous of each other, who didn't like each other, and didn't trust each other. It was a collection of men who were highly opinionated and strong-willed and were insisting that they have a very significant role in the decision-making process. Think about the Republican Party organized in 1854. It was bits and pieces of a lot of different things that came together. And that was all reflected in the cabinet because that's the kind of cabinet Lincoln had to put together if it was going to be representative of the party that was then in office. It represented all the discordant elements of the Republican Party. And we're talking about liberals and conservatives. We're talking about former Democrats and former Whigs. We're talking about Northerners and Westerners and border state Southerners. Certainly as the war began and Lincoln's administration began, they did not really have confidence in Lincoln. Attorney General Edward Bates said, "The president is an excellent man, but he lacks will and purpose, and I greatly fear he has not power to command." Or think about and be reminded of that famous statement by William Seward, the Secretary of State, the most important position in his cabinet, when he basically suggested that he would kind of take over the operation. In modern terms, something like a COO, the Chief Operating Officer, or as historians have sometimes used the phrase, kind of like he was going to be Prime Minister. And of course, Lincoln politely said, "No, thank you. I'll handle it just fine." Probably the worst challenge, or the most vexing challenge for Lincoln, was the Secretary of Treasury, Solomon Chase. He was a man of a powerful ego, with overly confident, and somebody who was constantly posturing to be the Republican nominee in the 1864 election. His self-confidence was so strong that Lincoln's personal secretary, John Hay, recorded, "He thinks there is a fourth person in the Trinity." Solomon Chase actually precipitated a cabinet crisis for Lincoln. Late in 1862, Republican congressional leadership began insisting that Lincoln restructure the cabinet and first on their list get rid of William Seward, because Seward, they believed, had way too much influence on Abraham Lincoln. So one day or one evening, a committee of Republican leadership met with Lincoln and presented their demands. Lincoln, as he was so skilled at, listened carefully, and after he got through listening, said, "Let's continue this conversation tomorrow night," and he excused these leaders. And they felt pretty good about that beginning. But when they came back the next night, Lincoln had his entire cabinet present without William Seward. That presents a little different situation. In my life as a college president or as a dean or a vice president of instruction, I can't remember the number of times when somebody came in to complain about somebody else and they were just telling me that this person was intolerable, and then when I brought that person together with the person who was intolerable, there was no comparison to what I heard privately. They really had a tendency to sugarcoat when the person was sitting there. Well, what this meant, of course, is that Lincoln had quite an advantage because he was moderating that meeting. And it was one thing for these Republican leaders in caucus to chastise Lincoln's cabinet and particularly William Seward, but it was an entirely different situation when there sat the cabinet and Abraham Lincoln, and Chase, of course, really had no choice but to basically support the fact that there was harmony within the Lincoln cabinet. Well, Lincoln then decided to tell a story. And Actually, this Republican leadership was trying to get a complete turnover of the cabinet. And here's what Lincoln said. Gentlemen, your request for a change of the whole cabinet because I have made one change. Simon Cameron had been let go and Edmund Stanton was the new Secretary of War. Gentlemen, your request for a change of the whole cabinet because I have made one change reminds me of a story I once heard in Illinois of a farmer who was having trouble with skunks. His wife insisted on his trying to get rid of them. He loaded his shotgun one moonlit night and waited for developments. After some time, the wife heard the shotgun go off, and in a few minutes, the farmer entered the house. "What luck have you had?" asked she. He responded, "I hid myself behind a woodpile, and before long there appeared not one skunk, but 7. I took aim and blazed away, killed one, and he raised such a fearful smell that I concluded it was best to let the other 6 go." Well, the upshot of the whole matter was that both Chase and Seward resigned, and Lincoln refused to accept them. And the upshot of the matter was that Lincoln had upstaged Solomon Chase and had gotten the upper hand and put him down a notch. Well, you may remember that Mary Todd, his wife, was so remorseful, particularly after Willie died, that they began having seances in the White House. And seances, of course, were something that people who were spiritualists believed in, that you could communicate with the dead. Mary Todd was kind of leaning that way. Lincoln didn't believe that, but he actually attended some seances. And after going to one of these, he said that the seances reminded him of the cabinet meetings. The voice of the spirits, he said, were as contradictory as the voice of his secretaries. Next, let's talk about, I think I want to do this before I go to emancipation. How many of you have read the book Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin? Okay, wonderful. I hope you agree with me that it's a fabulous book. I don't think Cleves have, or Brian, they haven't voted on the Pulitzer yet, have they? Yeah, I'm kind of betting that she's got a real chance to win the Pulitzer Prize for that book. You know, does a marvelous job of looking at Lincoln and those 3 people who ran against him for the presidency that were in the cabinet with him. But in her introduction, she makes this statement that I want to read, particularly for those of you who have not read the book. This then is a story of Lincoln's political genius revealed through his extraordinary array of personal qualities that enabled him to form friendships with men who had previously opposed him, to repair injured feelings that, left untended, might have escalated into permanent hostility, to assume responsibility for the failures of subordinates, to share credit with ease, and to learn from mistakes. He possessed an acute understanding of the sources of power inherent in the presidency, an unparalleled ability to keep his governing coalition intact, a tough-minded appreciation of the need to protect his presidential prerogatives, and a masterful sense of timing. His success in dealing with the strong egos of the men in his cabinet suggests that in the hands of a truly great politician, those qualities we generally associate with decency and morality, kindness, sensitivity, compassion, honesty, and empathy, can also be impressive political resources. It's a wonderful statement if you want to understand and appreciate the leadership of Lincoln. Let's talk about emancipation. Clearly, emancipation was the toughest domestic and social issue that Lincoln faced. The emancipation of slaves was truly a revolutionary act. When I teach and talk with students, I often suggest that the Civil War was the second Revolutionary War, not in the same sense that it either got or ensured independence, but when you think about revolutionary change, emancipation of slaves, the arming of free slaves or black people, and third, the first confiscation act in our history. Those all represented major and huge changes for people in the country.